Wednesday, May 28th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. It's National Accessibility Week, so today on the show we are asking, what does accessibility really mean? What is our understanding of that term? And there's been talk of creating a position of a disability advocate in this province. What should that role look like? That's the conversation today. And folks, as you're listening, right, if you have thoughts on this conversation, the text line is open, 709-327-8206. Email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. So that's around that concept of accessibility. What does it mean? What should it mean? What does it actually mean in this province? But where would we like to go with it? What should the role of a disability advocate be? I've got a full house here. Plus, we're making a couple calls. Let me see. We've got a couple of Pauls in here. So let's go with the Paul Powers, the first of the Pauls of Power Productions. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Nancy Reid, the Executive Director of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities for Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
And the second Paul, but you're both first for me. Okay. Paul Walsh, right? No relation. CEO of the Autism Society, Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Joanne MacDonald, Accessibility Advocate and Paralympian. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
All right. Let's start with, because I like to create a kind of an umbrella per conversation on shows, especially a show like this. So each of you is bringing different perspectives to this conversation. Paul Power, we'll start with you. Just tell us a bit about the perspectives you're bringing to this and a bit of who you are.
I'm involved in the arts community mostly theater, and I was born with a physical disability no one can see me right now, so I use leg braces and crutches for mobility and have all my life. And I started out at Mundrama, getting involved in theater, and for many years involved, and I always felt I was the only person with a disability, an obvious disability that you could see involved in our arts community back in the 90s. And as I got more and more experience, I thought of creating a company where we could see more of that diversity in our arts community. That's mainly my focus with Power Productions.
Excellent. Joanne.
Me.
You thought I was going to go around the clock, didn't you? All right, I like throwing people off, right?
Good job.
So tell folks a bit more just about yourself and the perspectives you bring to this conversation.
I had the pleasure of knowing a gentleman by the name of Eric Norman many years ago. And Eric was a gentleman who was paralyzed from the waist down. He became very involved with the disability community, but at a provincial and national level. And Eric was keenly interested in accessibility, specifically for individuals with mobility issues. Eric taught me a lesson with respect to accessibility. And people would say, well, what does accessibility mean to you? And Eric would say, accessibility means to me not having to ask.
Yeah.
So when you're making a reservation at a restaurant, asking whether or not there's steps in, if there's a washroom that's available, maybe if the menu is in Braille, but basically going to a restaurant, making that call, or showing up. But typically, we can't do that.
No.
It's always a constant, can we get in? Can we use the facilities? And on. It's even today. I'm going to shock everybody by saying I'm 73 years old.
No.
The very first time that the word accessibility was mentioned by government, by our government, I was 11 years old.
Right.
I think that kind of puts it in perspective, because we are still today fighting for accessibility.
Yeah, still. Right.
Still.
And through this conversation, there's a lot to dig into, right?
Absolutely. And we change. Individuals change. We typically spoke about physical accessibility, and it's so much more than that now. Yeah. And that needs all to be included and looked at.
Paul Walsh.
First of all, it's awfully hard to follow Joanne MacDonald.
I threw you, it's not fair to you. I'm sorry.
I will say that if you talk about somebody who you've learned from, so I'm 61, and the first time I heard the word accessibility was as a 12-year-old when I met Joanne MacDonald. And she's been a mentor, somebody I've learned from for years. So I'll triumph all of you. My perspective here today is twofold. I was born and diagnosed at birth with cerebral palsy. So I have a walking mobility disability, as well as manual dexterity in my left hand is compromised. So it's personal from that perspective. But I also have the privilege of representing the incredible autistic community in this province. And when I speak as CEO of the Autism Society, it is their voice and their words that I speak, not mine. And so I would like to also bring the perspective of accessibility from a neurodivergent lens, from a sensory lens. And so that'll be my two basic approaches, because I've been there 4.5 years, and I can tell you that when I got there, I didn't know a whole lot about autism, and the amount I've learned every day is overwhelming. I've read more about autism in 4.5 years than I've read about cerebral palsy in 61 years, and I have cerebral palsy.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for that. Nancy.
I just want to say I'm so happy to be here with this group today, and I'm looking at Joanne and Paul, and both of them have been mentors for me over the last years. My story is slightly different. I acquired my disability, and I use a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair. I acquired my disability about 20 years ago, and so as a 30-year-old at the time, and it's changed my whole perspective, my career, my thinking. I thought I knew something about disability because at the time of when I acquired my disability, I was then the parent of an 8-year-old child who was born with cerebral palsy, had multiple disabilities, intellectual disabilities, language or speech, and physical mobility. I thought I knew something about it, And then when my disability came out very quickly, I learned that I only knew how to be my daughter's parent as a parent of a person with disabilities. It's opened my eyes in so many ways. And now I get to live in this incredible world surrounded by individuals, recognizing the stories and the truths of so many people in our community today. My professional world is that I am the executive director of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, Newfoundland and Labrador. And we are a cross-disability, meaning representing and considering all types of disability in this province. And we do that province-wide, throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. And looking at systemic issues, policies, programs, systems that are really usually the things that are not working for people with disabilities in our province.
There's been talk, it's been a decade now, I'm sure more, but the need for a disability advocate. Lots of talk across party lines this spring around getting it across that finish line, but not there, right? Did not happen. Has not happened yet. Maybe it will happen in the future. It looks like it, right? But we don't know. We have to see. Why is this position so important?
We could talk all day about this, by the way. So in 2014, I was given the privilege of being appointed chair of the Provincial Advisory Council on the inclusion of persons with disabilities. And in that group, I met Nancy Reid, who was on that. We were talking about that then, and the government of the day then was saying how important it was. It's important on a number of levels. So if you look at the work of the Child and Youth Advocate, and I'll include the work of the Seniors Advocate, the issues that an advocate can bring forth, because they're an officer of the House of Assembly. They're not beholden to any one group or to a political party. Just exceed that which any of us as advocates can do. And it's really important that that office have investigative powers so that it can do the work and find the answers and point out the barriers and inequities that exist. Because what we're talking about here are rights. People talk about, they're stakeholders. No, we're rights holders. Because everybody deserves equity, and everybody has basic human rights, like going to a restaurant and not having to ask if there's stairs. That an advocate could do the investigation and get changes made.
Anyone else?
I think that it's also really important that we understand that the disability advocate must be somebody with that lived experience of disability, we in our communities so often talk about nothing about us without us. And that really means that people with disabilities, not just consulted and checked in on, but that we are actually a part of the processes that impact us so directly. And many of us, self-included, will say that we believe that the disability advocate must be an individual who identifies as a person living with disability, somebody who identifies as being a member of the community that we sit in. I think that's really important for us to remember as well.
Forgive me, Adam, but we finish each other's sentences a lot. I'm going to pick up on that
Go for it.
by saying that consultation isn't inclusion. So we hear the nothing about us with thing. I say, well, we consulted with. No. I'm to the point now where when someone calls us and says, we'd like to consult with you, I say, I'm not interested. We want to put somebody at the table who has autism, who can sit down and design, and I mean design and write the legislation.
Yeah.
Great. But haven't got time to talk to you and you not listen to us.
Yeah, because on the more pessimistic side of consultation, of that word, it feels like it can be awfully box-ticky.
Yes.
It is awfully box
Everyone's unanimous on that.
That's not the pessimistic side. That's the realistic
The realistic side. So on the realistic side, because it's like, we consulted, done. You're like, but we're not there at the table to help with this or to write this legislation.
Right.
Okay. Last week, we had 4 MHAs here at the end of we weren't sure at the time. It was the Thursday, right? So we're like, I think the House is ending. It seemed like it. We had all indications. And we were talking about this position, right? The creation of the position and the fact that it seemed like all the politicians and across party lines were in agreement. There had been talk, Nancy, you were at the House, the legislature, either that week or the week before, listening to folks, right? But it looked like it was closing, and even though it was on the calendar that there could have been another week, so I asked Liberal Minister of Justice and Public Safety, who was one of the guests, also Deputy House Leader John Hagee, about why not sit an extra week and get something passed on this. So we've got a clip here. We'll play this one, and I've got a second one after, but let's just listen to his response.
The devil is always in the details with these things, and I think nobody disagrees with the idea of the advocate, and I think you saw that yesterday with the Cole division, and we had a unanimous verdict. The fact is that there is work to be done behind the scenes, and we have seen in the past when this is done hurriedly, it's not done right. It will take some time, a couple of weeks, even a month, to get that work done, and we have come to the end of what has been a very productive legislative session. The last 4 years have seen more pieces of legislation passed in that period in this House than any other previous 4-year period. And that builds on the successes of the kind of stabilising mandate that we had in the first 4 years up to COVID. So I think it has been a very productive legislature. And I think, quite frankly, we are not aiming to delay anything unnecessarily. We just want to get it right, because if you rush it, there are challenges with doing that and then living with the consequences.
Liberal Minister of Justice, Public Safety, Deputy Government House Leader John Hagee on this show last week. We just want to get it right.
We want it right too, so start it.
Yeah.
Form the committee, pull in the lived experience, and get it done. There's lots of models that can follow, good ones, some not so good. Get it done.
In a previous life, I worked in the provincial government for about 10 years in communications, and did all the communication plans and speaking notes and everything for government.
Yes, you know how it works.
Yeah. And I'm reading in between the lines there, and I think I could see the totally coming now. We're going to need a discussion document about this, and we're going to need consultation across the province.
Jurisdictional scans.
So many of these over the years that end up on the shelf gathering dust. I think we need more action-oriented statements from our government.
Joanne, thoughts?
Oh, I'm in complete agreement with what Paul is saying.
Yeah.
It's, you just get worried sometimes that it will sit on a shelf and nothing will happen. And for me, the background here is that there have been a lot of advances with respect to disability within the province. We've made some great success in a number of areas. But I often feel like it seems to be a one-off. We'll fund your project, or we'll fund your program, or we'll do this service, and then it's gone. the important thing with the disability advocate, that person will be there. They will be an overarching looking at what is going on in our community. Where are the gaps? Where are the erosions? We're seeing erosion on a monthly basis almost. And that has to stop. And I see a disability advocate as somebody, or the office, as being on top of that. We have fabulous organizations in this province who do tremendous work, probably not getting near the amount of funding that they would require to do all that's needed. But a disability advocate, I think, is much more than that. I think it's an office that will oversee what's going on, not just with individuals, but also with organizations that are struggling, that may need that extra push, or somebody to come in. If MUNDA's not doing their work around accessibility, maybe they'll be called in by a disability advocate and say, okay, talk to us. Why are you not getting those elevators operating? Or why isn't that lift working? Or why aren't the ramps cleared? Whatever. But that's what I like about the disability advocate position, that I see it happening, that it will make people accountable to the decisions that they're making or not making.
Yeah.
Whether it's a developer or a contractor or a department within provincial government or a community organization or supporting a community organization. It's so varied in terms of what disability advocate position could become. It can be a very strong position. We can't let government sit back on this. Sit back on
there's
the
weight. Like there's weight to get, like for what you're saying. Like the position, when an advocate moves and says something, right? There's a press conference typically, and then there's stories around it, and there's questions, there's follow up, and you can follow this along a line that I think on my end of it for media looking at stuff, it feels like with that weight, things can even be easier to track with where stuff goes, right? From an advocate.
The word erosion stuck out to me there. So in my time as chair of the advisory council, I think there was 3, if not 4 ministers. So the second one, and I used to have the privilege before a meeting of going to the minister's office and we go through the agenda, and they're all great meetings. And they were very dedicated to that file. One of the ministers who was leaving looked at me and said, keep your foot on the gas. It can slip quickly. And he's so right. And the more I learned, the more I realized how right he was. And that was 2016. He told me that.
2016, right?
Yeah. I was just, to echo some of the things Joanne said, the accountability piece is something that, that I see as something so important to the role of the disability advocate. It's the accountability when we think about it for some 30+% of the population who are self-identify as being persons with disabilities. That's the latest numbers from Stats Canada. 30% of our population over the age of 15 in this province self-identify as a person with disabilities. It's a huge number of individuals. And we need that disability advocate to be accountable to the opportunities, to the services, to the programs that are available for persons with disabilities. I think it's also important for us to realize and remember that that's not a stagnant number. That number will change. People acquire disabilities throughout our lifetime. We are an aging demographic. We know that. We have the privilege of getting older. With that, often disability becomes a part of your life. And I think it's really important for us to remember that you may not be born with a disability, but you could become one of our community at any point in your life. It's not a bad place to be, but we need to have that disability advocate there to be accountable, to ensure that the opportunities will still be there for generations to come.
We have another, I'll play the second clip from Minister John Hagee as well, because it just expands a bit on some of the government record. And I think that can also help inform our conversation for where to go with it. So we'll give that one a listen.
We have had the Building Accessibility Code revised. There has been work done under that Disabilities Act. This hasn't just started. This is the concept of having the advocacy position. The work has been done through government, but it's been done over a course of time, and maybe we haven't been as good as we could have in terms of bringing that forward. There is still work to be done. I'm not saying the job is done, and that's why we all agreed that a disabilities advocate would be a reasonable next step. But the facts of the case are, I think it's a bit unfortunate to suggest that nothing has been done, because a lot of the stuff that has been done through accessibility codes, universal design, we actually commissioned a group of people people from the disability community to look at the Buildings Accessibility Code, and it was revised extensively. The challenge that I think Jordan references is that only applies to new buildings or buildings that have more than a certain amount being renovated. So it's not yet at a stage where we would go back and mandate it per retrofit.
Fair bit of body language from the folks here in studio going on right now. So
Blood pressure's going up.
Blood pressure's going up. That I could not sense. So let's phrase the internal feelings and thoughts right now from that clip.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to reference the Buildings Accessibility Act and the amendments, if I could call them that were made a couple of years ago. We in the community, many of us, self-included, see many of those changes as actually regressive. And when the minister spoke about consultation or reaching out to the community, that was done, but it was an illusion of inclusion, because while our community was consulted, all of the most of the recommendations that were put forward were absolutely disregarded, denied, and basically the solicitors went in there, changed some language, and we ended up with a Buildings Accessibility Act that was regressive in many ways, including the definition of persons with disabilities, which was exactly or was very much not in line with the more recent definition that was in the Accessibility Act. In that one in particular, for instance, the word sensory was removed. And we understood that, in a legal place, sensory refers to vision and hearing. However, many, and Paul is sitting next to me, many from the neurodiverse community, persons with autism, or autistic persons, thank you, were often, accommodated in the Buildings Accessibility Act because of the sensory definition. That was removed. And basically in the new Accessibility Act definition of persons with disabilities, you're only a person with a disability if you have vision loss, hearing loss, or have a mobility disability. It totally disregards any of the other identities of disability that we, as a community, embrace and recognize. And there are a number of other ways that the Buildings Accessibility Act was changed in ways that will prevent buildings from being accessible in a real way. I can go on forever on that one, but
you can.
But I'll stop there in the interest of time. I don't see how any of the argument that the minister has spoken to actually represents positive action for accessibility or for persons with disabilities in our community. We have witnessed over and over again in recent years that kind of regression.
I call it the Buildings Inaccessibility Act.
Right. Well, that says it all.
Well, it's like our community can't find themselves there. So there's a thing called the Disability Pride Flag. So it breaks down disability into 5 components, and I'm putting myself out here now because I can remember all 5. But physical, neurodivergent, sensory, intellectual, and invisible disabilities. Very few of those are covered in the Act. The Act, I laugh when he talks about, new buildings. Well, we can't seemingly build new buildings that are accessible today, and then, we have to retrofit. Look, person who I met when I was away, David Lepovsky, who's been an advocate in this country for years on disability and consultant on AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, pointed out to me when someone said about, it's a historic building, we can't make it accessible, that the Acropolis is accessible.
And that's older than a lot of buildings.
A lot of anything here, I'm pretty sure. So basically, accessibility is a right. Heritage isn't. So accessibility trumps heritage, one. But also, colonial building was made accessible.
Yes.
You were there. I saw you on the top of the step.
I was the first wheelchair user to the top level of the colonial building. Is it perfect? No, but it has improved
But the effort
greatly.
was made.
Yes.
And it's truly accessible. Everybody uses the same entrance. Right? You put a ramp in and a set of stairs, get rid of the stairs. Let everybody use the ramp. These things, so he talks about universal design. There's no universal design in the Buildings and Accessibility Act. It's actually, I would say, probably one of the worst Buildings Accessibility Act in Canada. But it was way better before they changed it.
Yeah.
How many schools, Nancy, aren't accessible in Newfoundland?
We currently have 34 schools listed today on the Newfoundland Labrador English School District website, or whatever it's called. 34 schools currently operating in this province today are listed as inaccessible. Of those who are accessible, many are listed as accessible. Many of them still have barriers to portions of the building, but there are still 34 schools listed as inaccessible.
And with respect, that's a measure of physical accessibility.
Yes, correct.
The number of schools that are inaccessible because of the lighting, because of the sound, because there's no wayfinding.
Yes.
Go to the Health Sciences Center. I challenge anybody to do wayfinding around the Health Sciences Center. There's no way. If your wayfinding is challenged, if you have a sensory disability, if you have autism, whatever, forget it. So these buildings are not accessible, and we continue to build them without these features.
And you have folks who will stand up to, I've heard this over the years from some of the reporting I've done. Folks will be like, oh, I mean, but it's up to code. And you're like, well, but that's
That's minimum standard.
It can pass code, but code can fail the people.
Yeah, there you go. We've got Valerie Maidment on the line. Hi, Valerie. How you doing?
Hi, good, thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. So you're an advocate and author. Your book, From Daylight to Dark, Finding Work in an Inaccessible World. Tell us a bit more. Give us a couple more lines on the book you wrote and why you wrote it. Even though I mean the title's fairly self-explanatory, but I'd like a little bit more from you on this.
About what the book is about?
Yeah.
Well, I'm currently visually impaired, of course, but I didn't grow up visually impaired. I lost my vision in 2008, which caused me to have to give up my business I was running. Excuse me. So after giving up my business and not having anything to do, and I was a person that was always on the go, I always wanted to have something to do, learning to cope with vision loss, I started to learn to cope, but then I came up against all of these barriers that I wasn't aware of until I lost my vision. And pretty much everything that I tried to do, there was always a barrier that I came up against. So in my mind, then I said, well, this is not right. Like it should be more accessible to people, not only people with visual impairment, but anyone with a disability. So then I took it into my head. I said, well, I'm going to see what I can do about it. So this is what brought me to writing From Daylight to Dark.
As you've moved in, so I think, writing that book is a step of advocacy, and you've been doing more advocacy work too as well. Can you talk a bit more about how you've moved into this advocate position for doing advocacy work yourself and talking more and doing work with the CNIB?
Yes, well, I'm currently working with the CNIB. They have different programs, one of which is a CNIB Advocacy Network, which is a course. It's a one-to-one hour to hour and a half for 10 months that we will do training on our human rights, on how to advocate for ourselves, how to who to contact, who not to contact, what to say. And I'm currently taking that course. Along with that course, I have a mentor who is teaching me the different steps to, once again, what to do in certain situations. We're in the process of trying to advocate for a couple of different things, one of which is I live in a rural community, and advocating for some kind of public transit for this area. And I'm a member of just became a member actually of the CNIB Rural Advocacy Committee, which is for pretty much the same reason, to see what the things that can be got for the rural areas.
So lots. The thing that comes up on the show fairly often, we'll talk about things. There's like that rural-urban divide, and when it comes to what folks can have from rights to what is there, what is often lacking in rural areas. So as we talk about the role of a disability advocate, what would you like to see from this role? Because I think some of it's already been highlighted from like the reason you wrote your book, parts that are in it, and the advocacy work that you're doing yourself on the rural side of things through CNIB.
Well, currently I would like, of course, to see buildings, and the purpose, of course, first, the purpose of my book is to educate employers on the need for accessibility in the workplace. And I'm hoping that from the book, there's people with vision loss or even with any type of disability that can take something away from the book, like something that maybe they weren't able to do or how to approach. So I'm hoping that. But in the meantime, with accessibility in rural areas, right now, what I find we need is some kind of public transportation, because anyone in a rural area, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. So if you haven't got a spouse or someone to call on, there's no way you can get out. Then there's the other thing is we're advocating for looking to advocate for a cell phone tower for our area, which we don't have, which is drastically needed, because even before now, which during just there a couple of weeks ago, we had a wildfire, which was about 30 minutes away from where I'm to, and there was people up there that could not use their phones, and luckily enough, that there was no injuries or anything, because it was very serious. Like someone could have lost their lives. And the other part of it is that, in my case, is without the cell phone tower around this area, there's apps and there's different things, technology that I can use to help myself be more independent, but that I can put on my phone. But if we haven't got that tower and haven't got that service, there's no way that we can do it.
Valerie Maidment, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about your lived experience, to talk about your book and your advocacy and the rural experience as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I'm looking around. Valerie brings up a lot of stuff, right? Rural-urban divide, connectivity, right? There's parts of the province where you can't use a cell phone. Also, if there's any bit of, for like transportation in rural Newfoundland and Labrador, rural areas. So all of this, and then when we think about this under that umbrella of stuff that a disability advocate could talk about, could take on, could bring further to the public. Any thoughts on what Valerie was saying?
We have offices. The Autism Society has offices around the province. So we have an office in what we call regional resource centers in Clarenville, Grand Falls, Windsor, Corner Brook, and Happy Valley Goose Bay. And there, and even from the areas outside of St. John's, I hear a lot about lack of services in rural Newfoundland. And it's not just transportation and whatnot. It's fill in the blank. I could talk all day about the wait times for diagnostics and things like that. But some basic access to things like speech language therapy, occupational therapy, and just a doctor or just a psychologist, psychiatrist. The absence of services outside of St. John's and sometimes within is a major barrier for people, because these are legitimate needs for individuals.
I think I'm reminded of an individual who called my office last week, I think, and he was living in Corner Brook, an individual with a mobility disability, and required basically an accessible cab or an accessible vehicle in order to get his chair, to the location, and had to go to a doctor's office in Corner Brook. It was not at the hospital, but it was a smaller doctor's office, and there currently is no accessible cab in Corner Brook. So our government, again, we have an accessible cabs program, and so funding is given, every year for particular cab companies that apply, to help them purchase accessible cabs. I know that cabs have been available in Corner Brook. I don't know what happens with the follow-through on that, the accountability of that, what that looks like. But I actually placed a call after this gentleman called me, and our provincial government, the Disability Policy Office at that time, was unaware that there was currently no accessible cabs in Corner Brook. This gentleman called his doctor's office, and he said, if I get an ambulance, could I come there on a stretcher and get in? And the doctor's response is, no, we can't navigate the narrow corridors and the spaces of this unit to enable him to go. And this particular gentleman, the only way he could leave his apartment, his senior's apartment, was by ambulance, because there was no accessible cab that he could get into with his chair. That is happening. And we're not talking about it happening in Lassie or Conch or some of the smaller communities. This is Corner Brook, an area where we just got a beautiful new hospital where people are going for service, but we don't even have an accessible cab in that space.
But even if we stay in St. John's, though, Nancy, government did provide cab companies with resources to retrofit vehicles to make them accessible, or to purchase, I guess, in some cases. But as somebody who's tried to use those after hours, you're darn lucky if you can get anybody to come 8 o'clock, maybe. If you're at 10 o'clock or if you're going out for supper or whatever, you're not getting an accessible cab in the city, even though they're available.
Yeah.
You cannot get them, which is pretty frustrating.
I've heard from some friends who will use that service. The challenge also is trying to find drivers who want to man these accessible cabs. And it's unfortunate, right? I guess for some, it's like that's a lot of hassle for an extra fare is sort of the attitude, right? You could have just a quick fare, or you could have to deal with accessibility. I think that's an unfortunate thing, and we need more capable drivers to man these vehicles. The vehicles, the drivers aren't.
Yeah, and if the mechanism that's being used is not appropriate, then maybe it should be a lift rather than a ramp system. Maybe there's another system that could be used. But if we go back to the disability advocate position, that's where we could look at it in terms of accountability, find out where the issue is. Let's see if we can find some way around this, create a strategy to correct the situation.
That's the thing, hey. I think none of us really know, or there is no central source to go to, right? For that, like we're talking about accountability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to throw out one thing. Well, I agree with everything that was said. I'll give one throw out to the taxi industry is that at least they're trying.
Yeah.
One thing that I will forever boycott until it changes is the rideshare services, the Ubers and whatnot, because there's no requirement for accessibility. They don't care. And so to me, this is a service that is just not, they don't want my money. But they're communicating directly to me. I don't want your money because I can't provide your service.
There's nothing there. At a time when one of those companies you mentioned is expanding to rural Newfoundland, and there is opportunity there, and perhaps a conversation to be had, not perhaps, there is a conversation that could be had, that should be had around that. We've got Steve Denty on the line, Manager, Commercial Development and Customer Experience, St. John's International Airport. Steve, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. So it's National Accessibility Week, and my understanding, according to a couple things I read from a press release, there are 2 new accessibility offerings at #YYT. Do you want to talk about them?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. It's an important week for us to talk about. We're certainly governed by a great deal of regulations and sort of a larger piece that we have to uphold. However, we have taken some action this week to announce a couple of initiatives sort of beyond our CTA regulations or anything through the accessible transportation planning and reporting regulations. We're very, very proud to announce that we are enrolled in the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower Program, which is a simple and convenient way to give passengers choice to identify themselves as maybe having a disability or a challenge that's not visible and that they might need some extra assistance while traveling. We also have worked with the community to install several inductive hearing loops at the airport. So those are devices for people with T-coil hearing aids in loud environments to be able to hear a little bit better. So right now those are installed at all the major airline check-in counters as well as our visitor information center.
Why is this so important for St. John's International Airport? I mean, other than the fact that it is 2025 and other spots are doing it, but why is it so important for YYT to be doing this?
It's one of our greatest missions is to try to make sure that travel is equitable and for everybody, to make sure that every passenger who comes through here has the same opportunity to travel and enjoy the space and travel with dignity. So whatever we can do to improve that experience, again, particularly beyond the regulatory piece, I would think most people would recognize that, through federal regulations, places like the airport are held to a higher standard. There's a lot that we do here, but we have tried to engage the community. Several of the folks on your call right now, so just listening, are good partners of ours, as well as folks with lived experience to sort of go, how can we do better to make sure we're creating a barrier-free environment, to remove those barriers and make sure that, again, everyone has the right to fair and equitable travel and they can travel with dignity.
Steve Denty, thank you so much.
I just want to say, the airport is a tremendous partner for the Autism Society and for many of us. And they get it when they say dignity. Dignity is what it's about. When someone in a business or whatnot says something like, because we want to ensure dignity, they understand it. So Steve's a great partner. The airport's been a wonderful partner of ours, and I can speak more highly of them.
One of the things that I'd like to mention as well is we've talked a lot in terms of the negative impact in accessibility and the issues that we encounter on a fairly regular basis. There are also a lot of people out there who are really trying within the rural communities, making their premises accessible or trying to, within the limitations. Sometimes they're handcuffed by the legislation itself. Yeah. But there are various places around this province who are making an extra effort to become accessible, whether it's a small convenience store or a B&B or what have you. There's lots of effort out there. I just wish our government was a little bit more progressive in terms of moving forward with legislation, making it easier or working with community to help them to become more accessible. We don't have that, and I think that would really be of benefit to the various business owners out there, rather than saying, well, no, you can't put that ramp there because that's going to block that sidewalk. No, you don't have to create this. Rather than doing that, why not sit with the business owner and say, okay, this is what you'd like to accomplish. Maybe these are some of the kinds of things that we could look at, rather than saying, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. We need to be much more progressive in these areas, rather than saying, no, you can't do it. Let's say, how can we work around, make sure you can do it?
Especially if you frame things around that word that was just mentioned, dignity, right? I find that it really clarifies stuff for me, right, when I hear that word. Nancy.
I'd love to hear, because Paul's sitting next to me here at the table about power, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're doing, Paul. It does really increase or enable dignity for people who are viewing theatre and also for people on stage. I think that listeners would really be interested in hearing what you guys do.
Thanks, but I totally agree with the dignity statement, and that's how I describe in the theater world or the arts world as well. Accessibility is not, a building's not accessible if you can come through the back door, right? That's right. I want, in my theater world, I want that audience member to have the same opportunity to experience the show the same way anybody who doesn't identify with living with disability has, right? That includes how you get in the theater, how you receive the theater story. The best thing about the arts is it's a definite community opportunity to experience something together, and then immediately when you separate people, either physically or with the way you come into a building, you're dividing that experience. Power Productions, we started. I think it's the first one in the province. We started a service called Audio Description, which is we have describers who describe what's going on the stage while the activity is taking place through headphones. So an audience member who basically cannot see the stage all of a sudden can come and experience theater. Is it perfect? No, but it's the first time anyone's I've traveled throughout Canada and everything, and it's a very common practice for many theaters. And so I wanted to bring it to Newfoundland. But I think that brings up a better point too, is people who like Power Productions, like my contemporaries here, we want to do stuff, but there's always a question of money. and where's that money available? And I think we need to change the concept of how do we define accessibility, and what would fall under funding to make things more accessible. I think government is federal and provincial, is very narrow on that. I talked about like the audio description service, and we applied for funding through an accessibility, I can't remember the program now, but it was one supposed to be about accessibility and structure. And if we had applied for a ramp, we would have gotten it.
Yeah, done, right? Yeah,
Right?
sure.
But we applied for a concept that's a little bit beyond a ramp, you know. We wanted funding for, I think it was for the headphones and that for this audio description. And no, it didn't fall under the parameters. And we're making great points here about the disability advocate and policy and legislation. And I was just thinking, as everyone was talking, how that trickles down to on the playing field, especially like in the arts. You know, if I'm applying for funding and legislation, everything doesn't define, you know, audio description as a priority or a common accessibility feature. I'm not going to get funding from the COD NL because there's not this policy or legislation above to direct the stakeholders like that, the arms at length organizations.
Right.
You know, if you're able-bodied, we don't question the costs associated with you going to public school.
No. Yeah.
Equity, inclusion, human rights shouldn't be measured by a price tag. They should be basic. I mean, we're entitled under Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms certain things as Canadians. They shouldn't be. It doesn't say comma as long as the price is reasonable.
There's a. I was looking in the lead up to today's show. Government of Newfoundland and Labrador Accessibility Plan 2024 to 2026. There's a line under, because I think it's Minister Paul Pike, and there's a line that stood out for me because it just talked about, it went back to talk about the 2021 legislation that was passed, right, for the Accessibility Act, right, became law in 2021. What happened afterwards? And then we've got this that I just mentioned. And this little bit, it says, when we know better, we do better. But then one of the headlines this week in the news, my colleague Del Roberts was reporting, it was this year's bar ceremony for newly minted lawyers won't take place at the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador in St. John's because of the building's accessibility issues. Instead, the Law Society is holding it at the St. John's Convention Center. But the incoming lawyer, Blair Curtis, let me see the quote. The quote, I think the standard should be that disabled people should have access to the building, that the building should be accessible. That's not going to work when I need to represent the client in that courthouse when there's a disabled person needing to access that core courthouse for a variety of reasons, just as a member of the public. But then to go back to that line, all right, when we know better, we do better.
One would assume they know that.
It feels that way.
Yeah.
Right?
They know.
Like, you know.
But if I'm not mistaken, that individual articled in Corner Brook, and the courthouse there isn't accessible. It was built in 2008.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for that. I noted on Monday there was a tender issued for the construction of a new courthouse in Stephenville Crossing. It's a retrofit of a former CNA building. So here's your opportunity. So that's a procurement thing. Procurement needs to be accessible. And we have to make those choices. But going back to my Acropolis example, the courthouse can be accessible. Not hard.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with a little positive moment because I think we need to celebrate those as well.
We've heard from the airport, which is positive. We've had a couple, and now, yes,
So I've got
it's
another
good.
one, but it's
Please.
and the procurement piece is what brought me there. One of the roles that in my coalition duties, sit on the Marine Atlantic Advisory Committee, and I don't have the total name in that space. But last October, as a part of that committee, we got to tour the newest ferry being used in the fleet. And I hope I don't butcher the name. I'm going to call it the Alisuanu, something in that regard. I will tell you that I, as a manual wheelchair user, surrounded by a number of individuals with different types of disability, an individual using a service animal, another individual identifying as being blind, individuals with hearing loss. We went to this new ferry and toured it while it was just at dock. Actually, they were doing the cleaning and all that stuff, so we were navigating a lot of spaces. The accessibility of that particular ferry was excellent. I remember one of the stories, and it sticks out in my mind so fully, is that the gentleman who was walking ahead of me, and so several of us in the space, maybe 5 or 6 of us, and the gentleman leading the group of us was a person who, without any particular aids, but identifying as legally blind, was able to navigate the environment. The wayfinding and the lighting and the spatial layout was such that he, as a blind individual, was able to lead all of us in a space that he had never encountered before. That's well done.
And
That's
every
dignity.
passenger, regardless of disability or not, who gets on that ferry benefits from all that.
Yes.
So what does
It's
that say
not-
to us?
It's
Right.
possible.
Do it right.
It's possible, right?
Do it right.
It's possible. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, any other thoughts?
I think it goes to that universal, I put in quotation marks, universal design.
Yeah.
The point was made earlier is, instead of stairs and a ramp, just have a ramp like everyone can use, right? And
Right.
I know in the theater world and that, one of the things that we try to do is universal design when it comes to auditions and rehearsals and getting people on stage. And I think I've learned so much. I think this is the role that any disability leader should take, is to listen, right, to the unique needs of people. And, I'm only an expert on my own disability, which is using leg braces and crutches. I can tell you all the ins and outs of that. But I've also learned working with a variety of people through Power Productions. I've learned so much just from working with people.
Yeah.
We had a show last year with diverse disabilities in the cast, and I learned how do I have an audition and how do I block someone on stage with lighting they can't see. I learned how to do that by working with them. How do I neurodivergent autism? I had a great turned out to be a great actress at how do I hold the rehearsal for them that meets their needs. It's that approach that I've had to learn. I'm not an expert on disability. I'm an expert on my own disability. What I am an expert on is I understand I have to listen.
Yeah, sounds like you're pretty good at listening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
learning.
Great point.
Yeah.
Terrific point.
Joanne, as we're wrapping down, gosh, the hour flies by. Any thoughts from you?
We're having fun, right?
Right? Well, we're talking. Lots of
Yeah.
talking.
I guess for me, it's excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't know that it's difficult to describe the feeling of wheeling into an environment where it is completely accessible.
Yeah.
Reaching light switches, counters. It's like there's such a sense of freedom. Being on getting on a bus, waiting at a bus stop, wheeling on, wheeling off. It's like it's just indescribable, and if we can get there, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Independence.
Right.
Independence and freedom. Yeah.
Dignity.
Yeah.
So then, how many minutes? We got a minute and a half. Where do we go? Where does this go? Nancy?
I think that, we push on. I belong to a community of persons with disabilities. I'm very comfortable in that space. I have no shame or air. Paul is laughing because he understands that. We are persons with disabilities and proud to be who we
Absolutely.
are. We are a strong community, and there are many of us out there without the supports and that are needed. None of us are islands, right? We really need each other in that way. But I think that it's really important, and in this election year, it's very important that we rise up, come together, and say that we matter. We are 30% of this voting population, and we're going to have our voices heard. That's the community that I choose to be a part of.
And we are surrounded by many, many people. So 30% plus.
Correct.
30%
Our significant
plus.
others,
Yes.
families. And
And if you care about this issue, and I said this at our conference last week to the people there, if you care about this issue, if you want change to happen, call your MHA, write your MHA, write your MP. Every candidate that comes to your door, take them to account.
Yes.
That's how change happens in a democracy. Because every one of us, I can tell you, and I only met Paul today, is proud of our disabilities, and we wouldn't want it taken away from us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, folks. Thank you so much for this. So that you, Paul Walsh there, we have Nancy Reid, Paul Power, Joanne MacDonald. Thank you all for the conversation. Folks, that is it for today's show. tomorrow, we are taking you to the Village Mall live on location. We're speaking with folks from the Ukrainian diaspora who, a bunch of folks are starting new businesses, new projects. We'll talk about what it takes to get something up and running for some small businesses, but we're also going to hear about culture, history, community, you name it. That's tomorrow on The Signal.